Margaret stood at the edge of the ceremony, the world buzzing around her, but all she could focus on was the glint of the rose vine bracelet Vanessa wore. The symbol long buried in her past was a clear sign that this wedding wasn't just about love, it was about control. As secrets and lies came to light, Margaret faced the painful truth. Her son was caught in a web woven by the woman he trusted most, and she would have to make a choice, save him or lose him forever. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. The venue looked like something out of a bridal magazine. Arched doors, golden trim, and manicured roses lined in neat, obedient rows. But beneath its beauty, the air felt wrong. Heavy, tense, like a storm holding its breath. This should have been a mother's proudest moment. But instead of joy, Margaret felt like an intruder in her own son's life. She stood motionless, her fingers clutching the handle of her handbag like a lifeline. Music drifted from the ballroom, softened by thick walls and layered pretenses. Somewhere inside, Jason was laughing, toasting, smiling for photographs with a woman who had methodically dismantled his bond with the one person who truly loved him without conditions. The wedge between mother and son hadn't appeared overnight. It began with small things, missed calls, distracted visits. Then came the strange silences, the subtle digs when Vanessa was in the room. And finally, the deliberate cuts, forgotten birthdays, unreturned messages, the coldness that felt rehearsed. Margaret's chest tightened as she scanned the estate's extravagance: crystal sconces, imported orchids, gilded rails leading up to oversized doors. Nothing about this felt warm or familial. It was a spectacle, curated to perfection. Vanessa's signature. All glitter, no heart. She took a step forward. Her heels clicked against the stone like a metronome, counting down to disaster. Was she really going to walk into this pageant and smile for pictures? Nod politely at strangers who'd heard a one-sided version of her story? Pretend everything hadn't already been lost? Jason used to call her every Sunday, used to ask for her pot roast recipe, beg her to dog sit when he traveled, bring her lilies just because. Now she could barely remember the last time he said "I love you" without glancing sideways to check Vanessa's reaction. And Vanessa, always polished, always poised, had played the long game. Cloaked in politeness, she'd planted doubts like landmines. Your mom seems stressed lately. I think she struggles with boundaries. Jason, maybe it's time you stood up for yourself. No one ever accused Vanessa outright. That was her genius. She never needed to. Margaret tightened her jaw. She had tried to ignore it, tried to keep the peace, but the wedding felt like a final verdict she hadn't been invited to appeal. It wasn't just Jason marrying Vanessa, it was Jason choosing a side, and Margaret wasn't on it. She turned halfway toward the parking lot, her breath catching in her throat. Maybe she should just leave, avoid the humiliation of watching her only child smile through vows she couldn't bear to witness. Maybe disappearing quietly was the only dignified option left, but something stubborn in her gut held firm. No. She had every right to be here. She'd raised Jason alone after his father died in that crash. She'd worked double shifts, skipped vacations, missed birthdays for the sake of stability. If anyone had earned a seat at this wedding, it was her. She looked back at the entrance. One hand lifted slowly toward the handle. Then a voice slid through the humid air like a blade, smooth, unshaken. You can't ruin this wedding, Mom. Margaret's hand froze midair. She didn't need to turn around. The perfume hit her first, sweet jasmine with a trace of musk, then the click of deliberate heels, and that tone, laced with condescension dressed as concern. Vanessa, Jason's face was lit with a groom's practiced smile, bright, boyish, perfect. But Margaret had known that face since it first squinted up at her in a delivery room, and behind the grin, she saw it, the flicker of doubt, the quick glance toward the door, the momentary clench of his jaw when Vanessa brushed her hand across his shoulder. He was too afraid to admit it. Margaret stood just outside the rehearsal dinner hall, her hands still tingling from that icy exchange with Vanessa. She had entered the building like a ghost, unseen, uninvited in spirit, even if her name was printed on the seating chart. Inside, everything gleamed, chandeliers like frozen fireworks, polished floors, strings of pearls wrapped around linen napkins, yet none of it masked the tension threading the air. Jason laughed at something Vanessa whispered, but the laugh didn't touch his eye. It was hollow, the kind of sound a man makes when he knows someone's watching. Margaret stayed near the back of the room, drifting along the edges like a misplaced thought. She could feel eyes on her, quick glances, sideways smirks, but no one approached. The only warmth in the room came from the heat of the overhead lights. Jason's smile twitched as Vanessa pulled him toward another group, her hand hooked possessively around his arm. He looked back just for a second. Their eyes met. It was fleeting, but real, and then he turned away. Margaret sank into the chair assigned to her, placed neatly by the kitchen doors, the scrape of the metal legs echoing like an afterthought. She hadn't expected a place of honor, but this was deliberate, dismissive. She stared at the linen-covered table, her mind drifted. She had imagined this night so many times over the years, helping Jason straighten his tie, sharing a dance, laughing with his soon-to-be bride. Instead, she was watching it all from behind glass, like a child with her nose to a bakery window. She looked up again. Jason was smiling too much. Vanessa was speaking too much. The whole room buzzed with a strange choreography, every movement perfectly timed, every expression curated like a press event. Margaret had lived long enough to know when something was being staged. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a performance. She considered getting up, walking straight to Jason, asking him quietly, firmly if he was happy, if this was truly what he wanted. But she didn't, because if he said yes, and he meant it, it would break her in a way she wasn't sure she could survive. So instead, she watched Vanessa glide through the room like she owned the building, her smile as sharp as it was sweet. She watched Jason follow half a step behind, nodding, laughing, touching the small of her back like it was muscle memory. And then something glinted. Margaret's gaze dropped to Vanessa's wrist. A silver bracelet. No, not just silver. A medallion dangled from it, half hidden by the sleeve of her gown. It was old, engraved. Rose vines. Her breath caught. It wasn't a common symbol, not something sold at any store in town. Margaret had seen that same emblem once before, decades ago, in a locked drawer, on a night she had spent her entire adult life trying to forget. Her throat tightened. The symbol had nothing to do with Jason, nothing to do with love. It belonged to a different chapter, a different version of Margaret, one she'd buried so deeply, even she barely believed it had happened. But there it was, dangling from Vanessa's wrist, like a warning shot. What did she know? Where had she gotten it? Margaret's fingers dug into her napkin, the linen twisting in her palm. Because if Vanessa knew about the rose vine, then she knew everything Margaret had tried to erase, and that meant this wedding wasn't just personal, it was planned. Margaret lay in the dark, eyes wide open, the ceiling above her spinning slowly like a carousel she couldn't stop. The hotel room smelled faintly of lavender and cleaning solution, but her thoughts overpowered everything. That bracelet, the rose vines, her past clawing its way into the present like a ghost with unfinished business. She sat up in bed, the sheets twisted around her legs like shackles. Why was Vanessa wearing that symbol? Why now? She hadn't seen it in decades, not since that cold winter night in 1993, when she'd locked the drawer and promised herself she'd never speak of it again. It had belonged to someone else, someone from another life, someone she became for a single reckless year before she met Jason's father, before she became Margaret the mother, not Margaret the secret. The bracelet was more than jewelry, it was a marker, a message. But was it deliberate? She didn't. That's what kept her heart pounding long after midnight. Was Vanessa just unknowingly poking a bruise? Or was she pressing with purpose? She paced the carpeted floor in silence, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The hotel clock ticked like a metronome of doom. She should try to sleep, but sleep was a luxury reserved for people without questions clawing at their ribs. She thought about Jason, about how he looked last night, drawn, distracted, a smile stretched too thin, like taffy ready to tear, and that look in his eyes when they met her, fleeting, but real. He was still in there, somewhere beneath the varnish of charm and manipulation, but he was slipping, and Margaret was starting to think she was losing him for good. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through her contacts with a trembling thumb, stopped at Elaine, her old friend from church, a woman who knew her better than most. She hesitated, then hit call. Elaine's voice was groggy but kind. "Maggie, you all right? I needed to talk, just for a minute." Margaret spilled it quickly, what she saw on Vanessa's wrist, how it linked to a past she'd buried, how it felt intentional, like a knife sliding slowly into old wounds. There was silence on the line for a beat too long, then Elaine said gently, "Honey, Maybe it's just a coincidence. You sure you're not reading too much into things? Margaret wanted to agree. God, how she wanted to. But her gut said otherwise, and her gut had never failed her when it screamed this loud. She thanked Elaine, hung up and dropped the phone on the bed. The room felt colder now. She crossed to the mirror, stared at her reflection, the lines in her face, the gray streaks in her hair, the exhaustion in her posture. She didn't look like a woman with power anymore. She looked like a mother who'd been slowly replaced by someone younger, sharper, calculating. Vanessa hadn't just taken Jason's heart, she'd rewritten his life, changed his friends, his priorities. Even his voice on the phone was different now, polished, cautious, as if he were constantly auditioning for approval. Margaret closed her eyes. When did I stop being his home? The pain was sharp, physical. She had one day left, less than a day really. The wedding was hours away, the window to speak the truth, to shake Jason from whatever trance he was in, was closing fast. And then, a chance. The hallway outside her room, footsteps, heels, familiar. She opened her door a crack and saw Vanessa walking alone, phone pressed to her ear, whispering something too low to catch. She wore a silk robe and slippers, her hair was pinned up, her bracelet gleaming faintly beneath the overhead light. Margaret stepped into the corridor. Vanessa stopped mid-step, turning slowly, a beat passed. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. Voice light, tone unreadable. Margaret pointed to the bracelet. Where did you get that? Vanessa glanced down, then back up with a smirk. That's not what you think, she said smoothly, but something in her eyes, flickering, uncertain, told Margaret everything she needed to know. Margaret stood at the hotel window, her reflection ghosted against the glass, as morning light poured over the sprawling St. Evangeline estate. From up here everything looked like a painting, flawless and serene, doves in golden cages, a harpist warming up under the rose-covered arch. But perfection, she knew, was the best disguise a lie could wear. She turned from the view, chest tight, the dress she'd ironed the night before, navy chiffon, modest and neat, lay across the bed like a flag of surrender. She pulled it on slowly, her fingers trembling at the zipper. No one had asked her what she wanted to wear, no one had asked her anything at all. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. They looked older today, tired. Had they really raised a son alone for 29 years only to become invisible on his most important day? Her phone chimed softly, a calendar alert, Jason's wedding, 11:30 a.m. She silenced it with a tap, then tossed the phone onto a nearby chair. Her stomach churned. The car ride was quiet. The driver offered a polite smile in the mirror. You must be proud, he said. Margaret nodded, forcing something like a smile back. But inside, her heart was clenched like a fist. She couldn't stop thinking about Vanessa's bracelet. The rose vine symbol wasn't just decorative, it was personal, painful, a relic of a year Margaret had buried so deeply, it might as well have belonged to someone else, but now it had resurfaced on the wrist of the woman marrying her son. Coincidence, or threat? When she arrived, the estate was already overflowing with guests, white umbrellas, cascading floral garlands, soft jazz drifting through hidden speakers. It looked like money, like control, exactly the kind of fantasy Vanessa would manufacture. Margaret stood near the edge of the ceremony lawn. People brushed past without greeting her. One woman whispered something to her companion, then laughed too loudly. No one offered her champagne. No one said, "You must be Jason's mother." She could have been the gardener. Jason stood near the altar, surrounded by groomsmen. His tux was perfect. His posture was. He kept adjusting his cufflinks, shifting from foot to foot. When he looked up and saw her, something flickered across his face, regret. Then he looked away. Elaine found her a few minutes later, breathless and pale. "I need to tell you something," she whispered, pulling Margaret toward the shade of a tree. "What?" Margaret asked, the panic already rising. Elaine scanned the area, then leaned in. "Jason's been trying to back out." Margaret froze. "What do you mean?" Elaine swallowed. "He told my husband last week, said he wanted to cancel it, but Vanessa's threatening him with something personal." The world shifted under Margaret's feet. This wasn't a wedding, it was a hostage situation in slow motion. "What is she holding over him?" Margaret asked, barely breathing. "He didn't say," Elaine replied, "just that it would ruin him, his job, his life, everything." Margaret's throat went dry. What kind of secret would make Jason walk into a lifelong prison with a smile on his face? She looked across the lawn again. Vanessa was laughing with a bridesmaid, her hands moving in elegant circles, that bracelet catching the sun. She was glowing, effortless, dangerous. Margaret pulled out her phone. Her fingers shook as she scrolled to Jason's name. She had to talk to him, now, before the music played, before the ceremony started, before the vows sealed it all shut. But just before she hit call, her phone vibrated again. A new message, unknown number. She opened it. 3 sentences, plain, precise. If you do anything today to ruin my happiness, you will regret it. Vanessa Margaret sat stiffly in the 3rd row, hands folded in her lap, watching her son stand at the altar with a smile that didn't belong to him. To the guests, he looked radiant, confident, but she saw it, the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the hollow sheen in his eye. It was joy performed, not lived. Vanessa stood across from him, her expression soft, adoring, her movements fluid like someone who'd been rehearsing since childhood. The photographer snapped pictures as she adjusted Jason's boutonniere, her fingers brushing his lapel with possessive precision. Margaret's pulse drummed in her ears. The air was too still, too composed. People whispered politely around her. Someone 2 seats down sighed at the beauty of the moment. But Margaret wasn't breathing. Her ribs felt cinched by wires. Jason's head turned slightly. His profile caught the light, sharp, handsome, everything a groom should be, but his shoulders remained tight, his stance frozen, just short of natural. The officiant cleared his throat and began, "Dearly beloved." Margaret didn't hear the rest. Her eyes were locked on her son. She thought of how he looked as a child, eyes wide with wonder, asking if love could really last forever. She thought of his first heartbreak, when he'd called her in tears from his college dorm. She thought of the boy who once danced on her feet in the kitchen while waiting for cookies to cool. That boy wasn't here. This man before her was a polished shell, and Vanessa, she had shaped that shell herself. The ceremony continued. Words about loyalty, sacrifice, trust, irony, all of it. Margaret's fingers curled into fists in her lap. She had seen Vanessa's third Elaine's warning, knew Jason wanted out, and still he stood there, locked in place like a statue carved from fear. The worst part, no one else seemed to notice. The guests leaned in, dreamy-eyed. Vanessa's family smiled with pride. Margaret sat alone in her knowing, drowning beneath the weight of silence. Jason turned to accept Vanessa's hands in his. For a second, Margaret almost rose, her legs tensed, her heart pounded. She could speak, she could interrupt. The minister hadn't reached the vows yet. She still had time, but a flicker of motion stopped her. Jason's eyes shifted, quickly, directly to hers, and for a single searing second, he held her gaze. There it was, pain, gratitude, and something deeper, a plea. Her breath caught in her throat. He looked away just as fast. The minister was still speaking, his voice solemn now, "To have and to hold. From this day forward." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the silk drapes strung along the trellis. Vanessa smiled at Jason. He smiled back, but Margaret knew the truth. The truth was in the tremble of his jaw, the forced ease of his posture. He was walking into a prison wrapped in ribbon. She wanted to scream. Instead, she remained still and broke. She felt the resentment boil inside her at Vanessa, at the guests, at herself. She should have done something earlier. She should have pushed harder. She should have never let it get this far. A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She was done pretending, done playing nice. Vanessa was winning, but only for now, because Margaret felt something shifting deep inside. Not rage, not helplessness. Resolve. She didn't know how yet, but she would not let this finish quietly. She would find out what Vanessa was holding over Jason, and she would tear it apart, piece by piece, lie by lie. As the vows began, Jason looked at Margaret once more, and there was something in his eyes that broke her heart all over again. A warning. The sun was too bright, the chairs too white, the ceremony too quiet. Margaret felt like she was being suffocated by civility. As the officiant's words faded into background noise, her pulse was in her ears, her fingers ached from clenching, and all she could think was, "He's slipping away from me," right in front of everyone. Applause scattered across the lawn as the officiant concluded his blessing. Jason and Vanessa turned toward the crowd, joined hands raised, The cameras clicked. People stood. Margaret remained seated, her palms sweating. Someone leaned down to her ear. They're calling for the mother of the groom to speak. It was a well-rehearsed moment. Her cue. She was supposed to smile, walk up, say something tender about her son, and how lucky he was to find love. But nothing about this moment felt real. Still, Margaret stood. Her heels wobbled slightly in the grass. Her dress clung too tightly at the waist. The microphone was cold in her hand, as she looked out at the sea of approving faces, at Jason, who stared back with an unreadable expression, and Vanessa, calm, elegant, eyes sharp as glass. "I'd like to say," Margaret began, but she never got further. Vanessa stepped forward, laughter already dancing in her throat. "Oh, Margaret, don't make this about yourself." The crowd chuckled, uncertain. Jason shifted. His eyes widened. Just for a second. Margaret blinked. "Excuse me?" Vanessa tilted her head. "You always have a story, don't you? Always a way to make every room orbit around you. Let's not turn a wedding into a therapy session." The air changed. Laughter stopped. Glasses froze mid-toast. Margaret's grip tightened on the microphone. Her face flushed. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Every eye was on her now. Jason stood frozen, one hand still in Vanessa's. He didn't move, didn't speak. That silence hit harder than the insult. She looked down at her son, hoping, begging for something. A word, a gesture, a defense. But all she saw was hesitation, conflict, shame. Something broke inside her. She lowered the mic. The sting in her throat wasn't from tears. It was from swallowing every word she had rehearsed. Every moment she'd imagined this being different. A cousin of Jason's, Sarah, stood abruptly from the second row. "Vanessa, that was out of line." Vanessa turned slowly. "It's my wedding, Sarah. And I don't need a guilt trip from someone who hasn't been sober since Easter." Gasps. A rustle of discomfort. Sarah sat down. Jason rubbed his temple. Margaret stood there a moment longer. Then she stepped off the platform. Her heels sank into the grass as she walked past rows of white chairs, avoiding everyone's gaze. Her pulse roared in her ears. She didn't cry. Not yet. Inside, she was shaking. Humiliated, hollow. She exited through a side path that curved toward the back gardens. The sunlight hit her too hard. The flowers smelled too sweet. She needed air, space, anything that wasn't filled with judgment and shame. She found a bench beneath an oak and sat, her hands trembling in her lap. She had tried to hold on, to smile through it, to give her son his moment. And for what? He hadn't defended her. Not once. She pressed her fingers to her temples. She couldn't undo the ceremony, but she could stop pretending. Something had to change. Because if she didn't act, she would lose him forever, and maybe herself too. She took one slow breath, and then, footsteps. A woman in a headset and clipboard appeared from the stone path. The wedding planner. Her face was flushed. Urgent. "You need to come with me," she said quickly. "Right now." Margaret stood, heart racing. "Why? What's happened?" Margaret followed the wedding planner down a corridor that didn't appear on any guest map, narrow, dimly lit, and strangely quiet. The deeper they walked, the more the sound of laughter and music faded into something muffled and distant. Her chest felt tight with anticipation. Something was coming. She could feel it rising, like a tide she couldn't stop. The planner stopped beside a green door tucked beneath an arch. "She asked me to bring you here," the woman said quietly. "Said there was something waiting." "Who?" Margaret asked, already knowing the answer. But the woman only shook her head, already backing away, muttering into her headset before disappearing around the corner. Margaret reached for the doorknob. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened it. The room inside was too warm, scented with flowers and perfume. A bridal robe hung on the wall, heels discarded neatly beside it. It was Vanessa's dressing room. Mirrors surrounded the space, reflecting light and shadow, lipsticks, powders, a string of pearls, everything elegant, everything arranged, except for one thing. A single ivory envelope sat centered on the vanity table, her name written in heavy, deliberate ink across the front. No stamp, No seal. She stepped forward, her heels making no sound on the plush carpet. Her fingers hovered above the envelope, unsure whether to touch it. Her name, her identity felt like a challenge scrawled in black. She picked it up. The weight of it was unsettling. Inside was a folded letter, and tucked beneath it, something stiff. A photograph. She unfolded the letter first. Her eyes scanned the lines slowly, her stomach clenching with every word. You were the practice run. He doesn't need softness. He needs direction. You gave him fear. I gave him control. Love doesn't raise leaders. I do. Her knees weakened. She gripped the vanity for balance, the letter fluttering slightly in her trembling hand. She turned to the photograph. At first she didn't understand what she was looking at. It was Vanessa, years younger. Darker hair, leaner face. But that wasn't what made Margaret's breath catch. It was the man beside her. He wasn't Jason, but he looked like him. Same bone structure, same haunted eyes. He was lying in a hospital bed, eyes glazed, hooked to IV. A faint bruise bloomed along his jaw. And Vanessa, she was smiling. Not posing, not joyful, but smiling like someone who had just won. Margaret turned the photo over. In neat, slanted handwriting were the words, "This is how your son will end up." The room tilted. Her lungs forgot how to breathe. She clutched the photograph to her chest like it might catch fire. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was premeditated. Margaret's thoughts raced. Who was this man? Why had no one seen this photo? Why leave it here for her? And why now? Her first instinct was to run straight to Jason, to shove this in his face, to scream until he saw her, until he believed her. But then, would he? Would he think she fabricated it? That she'd finally gone too far? She blinked against the sting of tears. No, she had to be smart, strategic. Vanessa had laid her pieces with precision. And if Margaret wanted to stop this, she needed to be sharper than she'd ever been. She folded the photo back into the envelope and slipped it into her purse. The door creaked slightly behind her. Her nerves jumped, but no one entered. The room was still, too still. She turned to leave, but as her hand touched the doorknob, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. One line. You opened it. Good. Now we understand each other. Margaret stared at the screen, and in that moment, she realized this wasn't the end of Vanessa's plan. It was only the beginning. Margaret's breath came fast as she walked down the corridor, the echo of her heels sharper than before. Her fingers gripped the envelope like a detonator. The dressing room felt miles away now, but the message inside still burned in her chest. Vanessa wasn't just manipulative, she was dangerous. And Margaret was done being polite. Outside, the wedding swirled on. All champagne smiles and soft guests posed for photos under silk banners. Oblivious to the storm brewing behind Margaret's eyes, she scanned the lawn. Then she saw her. Vanessa stood near the stone fountain, a picture of composure. Her train was draped over her arm, her fingers brushing the petals of a rose bouquet as she spoke to a bridesmaid. Her face lit with laughter. Margaret marched toward her, not caring who was watching. "Vanessa," she said, her voice cold and unshakable. Vanessa turned slowly. The laughter slipped from her face when she saw what Margaret held. "Alone," Margaret said. "Now." The bridesmaid looked to Vanessa, unsure. "It's fine," Vanessa said, too brightly. "Give us a moment." The others scattered, sensing something sharp in the air. Margaret wasted no time. She held up the envelope. "You left this. You wanted me to see it." Vanessa's lips twitched. "Did I? You've been digging into my finances. My life. Why?" Vanessa's voice turned silky. "Because you're part of the equation. I needed to understand your leverage." "This isn't strategy," Margaret said. "It's obsession." Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. "It's foresight. You've built your son's world around guilt and sacrifice. I'm offering him freedom." "You're not offering him anything," Margaret snapped. "You're caging him." Vanessa's smile hardened. "Love is a kind of control, Margaret. You should know you've been weaponizing it for years." Margaret recoiled. "I protected him. You clipped his wings," Vanessa said. "And now he doesn't know how to fly without asking your permission." Margaret's throat tightened. That man in the hospital bed. Who was he? Vanessa blinked. Then someone who made the mistake of thinking I'd forgive betrayal. You broke him. He broke himself. Vanessa said. I just let gravity do the rest. Margaret's skin went cold. You think Jason will survive you? Vanessa added. He's strong now. Because of me. Focused. Polished. I've prepared him for the world you sheltered him from. Margaret stepped closer. You've built a fantasy, but it's cracking. Vanessa tilted her head. I control the narrative. You're a cautionary tale in heels. Margaret's hands shook. If you ever loved him. This isn't about love, Vanessa cut in. It's about legacy. Margaret opened the letter again, her voice shaking now. You wrote, love doesn't raise leaders. I do. You're not building a legacy. You're building a prison. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Your accounts, your donations, your retirement. All traceable. You should be careful what stories you share. People might stop believing them. You've been gathering information. Margaret said, her voice catching. Why? What are you planning? Vanessa leaned in. To make sure you never rise again. Financially, socially, personally. When I'm done, you won't be a threat. You'll be a footnote. Margaret's heart pounded. You planned this from the start. Vanessa's smile returned. Of course I did. Margaret felt the walls close in, every moment of doubt and silence echoing louder than ever. This woman had burrowed into their lives, studied their weaknesses, and turned her son into a pawn. But then, what's going on here? Jason's voice. He stood just behind them, hands in his pockets, eyes flicking between them, confused, suspicious, already bracing for the answer. Vanessa didn't turn. Her smile froze. Margaret looked at her son, the letter still clutched in her hand, and in that instant, she knew, the next words could change everything. Margaret slipped away from Vanessa, and Jason, into a quieter side of the estate, her legs unsteady, mind swirling with everything she'd learned. She needed air, space, clarity, but the chaos she carried wasn't fading. It was sharpening. She moved past guests clustered under linen umbrellas, laughter drifting over champagne flutes. Her pulse was in her ears, her hands pressed tight around her purse hidden beneath her coat. Footsteps came behind her. It was Mark, Jason's best friend and college roommate. His face looked pale under the afternoon sun. Margaret, he said quietly. Can we talk? She nodded, guiding him to a small wooden bench behind a rose-draped trellis. No one would watch here. He sat across from her, unfolding a slim folder. I swear I didn't plan this, he said. But you deserve to know. Margaret's heart tightened. He pulled out documents, typed pages, printed emails, scanned financial statements. Vanessa's name was on everything. Her plan mapped out. Legal documents, transferring Jason's power of attorney, bank account controls, a timeline showing she planned to freeze Margaret out financially on the day of the wedding. Messages detailing how she intended to isolate Jason from friends and family, including Margaret. Mark's hands trembled as he passed each page. She's been assembling this for months, he said. Even before they got engaged. Margaret's breath hitched. Her entire life, her savings, her relationships, all threaded into Vanessa's design. This is insane. Margaret whispered. He doesn't know any of this. No, Mark shook his head. He's been so manipulated. He trusts her more than he trusts me some days. Tears stung Margaret's eyes. So what are we going to do? She asked, voice trembling. Mark leaned in. I want to help you, but you'll need proof. Jason needs to see it himself. Margaret clenched her purse straps. I'm terrified. Mark nodded. Me too. She realized at that moment. This wasn't just a mother fighting for her son. It was a war for his soul. They sat in silence, the roses above swaying in the afternoon light. Mark touched her shoulder. I've saved copies of everything. I'll give you all of it. But you have to promise me you'll think carefully about how to show Jason. You could lose him. Margaret swallowed. She finally understood the moral trap. Exposing Vanessa might save everything, but it could also destroy the fragile trust Jason still had. She looked across the lawn where the wedding party passed, laughing. Perfect. Painted. She thought of her son's life, built between power and lies. Mark stood, buttoning his suit jacket. I should go. They'll wonder where I am. He hesitated, then said, one more thing. Someone else saw the documents. Someone inside Vanessa's circle. They said, your son doesn't know the truth about his bride. But I do. Margaret felt the blood drain. She closed her eyes, leaning back against the bench. Her mind spun with questions. Could she unravel this in time? Could she do it without losing Jason entirely? The wedding buzzed around her. The music from the garden drifted toward her. The day continued, as if nothing had cracked. She opened her purse and slipped in the folder. Proof. Danger. Betrayal. And she realized, she had to decide. Expose everything. Tarnish the illusion. Risk her son's love. Or stay silent and let Vanessa win. Margaret looked toward the ceremony lawn. The next words she spoke would either save or shatter her son's life. Margaret stood beneath the garden archway, the late afternoon sun splintering through the roses overhead. In her purse the folder of secrets pulsed like a live wire. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a line in the sand. And she was done being stepped over. Her phone buzzed. A new text. Vanessa. This is your last chance. Walk away or I burn everything. Margaret didn't flinch. She slipped the phone back into her clutch, her spine straightening. Inside the estate, the reception had begun. Applause rippled across the lawn, champagne flutes clinked, and the pianist began the soft prelude to the first dance. The world spun around a lie, polished and perfumed. She spotted Jason near the far end of the terrace, speaking to a pair of guests. He looked impeccable, calm, like a man who didn't realize the ground beneath him had already started to crack. She walked toward him slowly, every step deliberate. Jason, she said quietly. He turned, saw her. His jaw tightened. We need to talk, she continued. He set down his glass. Now's not the time. It's the only time, Margaret said. Jason gestured toward the celebration behind them. You can't let it go, can you? No, she said plainly. He sighed. You always make things about you. Her throat tightened. This isn't about me. It's about what she's done. You think you're protecting me, he said, eyes flashing. But all you're doing is tearing me in half. Margaret held his gaze. She's not who she says she is, Jason. He looked away. I have documents, emails, financial records. She's manipulating you, controlling your decisions, planning to erase me from your life and take control of everything. Jason gave a bitter laugh. That's what this is. Another conspiracy. It's not a theory. I have proof. Mark brought it to me. That stopped him. He stared at her. Mark. Yes. He's seen everything. And he's scared for you. Jason's face crumpled for a flicker of a second, then hardened again. You're doing this now. On my wedding day. She chose this timeline, not me. He looked down, hands flexing at his sides. Even if it were true, you'd ruin everything? If the truth ruins it, then it was already ruined. Jason blinked hard. You want me to choose between you and her. I want you to choose yourself, Margaret said softly. He was silent for a long time. I can't, he said at last. The words sliced deeper than she thought possible. Jason stepped back, retreating into the crowd, into the curated life Vanessa had wrapped around him like silk. Margaret stood frozen, the world blurring around her. She felt like she was being erased in real time. From across the dance floor, Vanessa smiled at her like a woman who'd already won. But Margaret didn't move. She wouldn't. Not yet. She turned, heading back toward the estate's eastern hall, toward the corridor, where she'd first received the letter that changed everything. Her breath was shallow, her thoughts darting. She had the proof, she had allies. But Jason didn't believe her, and if he didn't see the truth soon, there might not be anything left to save. The hallway was quiet, dimly lit. A draft followed her steps as she passed the dressing rooms. The hum of the party dulled behind thick oak doors. Then a figure stood at the end of the corridor.
Margaret paused, her breath caught mid-throat. The man stepped into the light. Older, grayer, but familiar in a way that defied logic. She felt her knees weaken. He spoke softly. Hello, Maggie. She staggered back a step because the man in front of her, the man she buried 29 years ago, was Jason's father. Margaret's breath caught as the man stood before her in the dim corridor's glow. His face held her memories, years of laughter, love, and betrayal. She wasn't prepared for this. He was supposed to be dead. Margaret steadied herself against the wall, her heart hammering. "Dad?" He nodded, posture straight in a tailored suit, decades grayer and decades wiser. "Maggie, I never left." She blinked, tears blurring her vision. "Why?" she whispered. "Why now?" He spread his hands, eyes solemn, because Vanessa was the next step, but she wasn't the beginning. Margaret pressed her forehead against the cool paneling. "I thought you died that night," she said, voice small. "All those years, I stayed. I raised Jason alone." "Your mother lied," he said quietly. "She told people I left. She burned everything connecting me to you and to Jason." Margaret's breath lodged in her throat. "Your grandmother saw what I did, my business, my mistakes, and she decided to protect you by erasing me." "You planned this wedding," he said. But Vanessa was working from inside that lie. She had help. Margaret's knees felt weak. "Who else?" He looked at her, as if weighing whether she was ready. "She's not your only opponent. Your own family betrayed you decades ago. Vanessa is just the newest layer." Margaret shook her head. "I can't believe it." He held up an old photograph, himself younger, beside Jason's grandmother in a hospital bed, the same rose vine bracelet on her wrist. "She inherited the same ambition," he said, "the same secret, the same ruthlessness." Margaret's head reeled. "So she planned this with my family," he sighed. "She didn't need to plan it. They built the staircase. Vanessa just climbed it." Margaret took a step back. "Do you know what this means?" she asked. "That my son's life, it was arranged before he was born." He nodded. "Your mother made deals, signed away dreams, signed away you." Silence followed. Margaret felt years collapse inside her chest. "So this is more than just Vanessa," she whispered. "It's generational," he said. "The marriage, the control of assets, it was destined." And then Vanessa came to execute the final act. Margaret slammed her fist gently into her palm. "What do you want me to do?" "I came to give you choice," he said. "Now you have the proof, not just the documents Vanessa left. This is the original architecture." Margaret closed her eyes, overwhelmed. Jason's wedding music drifted through the walls, soft and mocking. "We have a decision," he said. Margaret looked toward the reception hall door. Laughter floated out. "It's not too late," he said. "But your son is still in the dark." She nodded. "I'll stop Vanessa," she said. "But you stay hidden." He placed a hand over hers. "I always meant to come back," he said. "When the right moment came." His voice cracked with regret. Margaret swallowed. "That moment is now." He nodded. "Be careful, because I left her alive, and she keeps her allies close." Margaret felt her resolve harden. She turned to leave, clutching the envelope of old betrayal and new proof. As she passed the empty dressing rooms, her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Your son doesn't know yet, but he's waking." Her head snapped up. The corridor fell silent. Then, a voice cut through the hush. "Mom, I need to talk to you. I think I finally understand what's been happening." Jason's voice. Margaret's breath froze. She turned toward the reception hall, tears forming. But her hands, strong. The truth had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jason's voice reached into Margaret like light through storm clouds. But it wasn't relief she felt. It was terror, because when truth arrives, it doesn't always come kindly. She turned, and there he stood, tie loosened, brow furrowed, eyes. They faced each other in the corridor, a still frame in the middle of a wedding that now felt like someone else's dream. "I read the message," Jason said quietly. "I saw what Mark gave you." Margaret's lips parted, but she didn't speak. "Not yet." He stepped close. "I don't know what to believe." Her voice trembled. "Then start with this. I didn't want to ruin your day. I wanted to save you from spending your life in a lie." Jason ran a hand through his hair. "So everything she said was manipulation." "She built it piece by piece," Margaret said. "Steady now. Not just the wedding. Your job. Your friends. Even me. She isolated us on purpose." Jason flinched like the words hit bone. I thought I loved her, he whispered. You did, Margaret, because you didn't know who she really was. Jason looked away, jaw tight. I can't tell what's real anymore. Margaret took a step forward. You're real. Your instincts are real. I saw you hesitate, Jason. Every time she touched your arm, every time she spoke for you, he said nothing. She took your voice. Margaret continued. You don't even speak like yourself anymore. Jason's shoulders slumped. She said you were jealous, controlling. Margaret almost laughed, soft, bitter. I was your mother. I gave you everything I had. That's not control. That's love with stretch marks and second mortgages. Jason's lips twitched, but his eyes remained pained. She told me you'd try to turn me against her, that you couldn't let go. I didn't try to turn you, Margaret said. I tried to reach, but she got there first. He nodded slowly, staring past her. When did I stop thinking for myself? He asked. Voice brittle. Margaret hesitated. When you started choosing peace over truth. Jason leaned against the wall, eyes glassy. I'm so tired, Mom. I wanted this wedding to be the beginning of something. Now it feels like the end of everything. Margaret touched his hand. Maybe it's both. He gripped her fingers briefly, then pulled away. I still love her, he said. Even knowing this. And that's what scares me most. Margaret's heart cracked anew. Then you need to decide if love is enough. Jason stared at the envelope she held. The photos, the letters, the plans. I don't hate you, he said suddenly. I don't know who I am when you and she both. I'm not pulling, Margaret said. I'm letting go. But not until you see the rope. Silence stretched. Then Jason looked at her fully, his expression unreadable. I have to leave, he said. Margaret blinked. What? I need space. From both of you. From all of this. Her mouth went dry. Jason, please. I can't make this choice with you both breathing down my neck. I need to figure out what's mine and what's been built around me. Where will you go? She asked. Voice barely a whisper. He shrugged. Somewhere quiet. I'll let you know when I've figured it out. Margaret's hand dropped to her side. The envelope in her fingers bent under pressure. I love you, she said. I know, Jason replied. And then he walked away, not toward the reception, not toward Vanessa, but away from everything. Margaret stood alone, in a corridor full of ghosts, holding truths that had come too late to save the day, but maybe, just maybe, in time to save the man. Margaret stood alone beneath the arched hallway, her reflection flickering in the antique mirror. Her hands trembled, not with fear but with readiness. The time for wondering was over. It was time to face the storm she'd spent decades outrunning. She walked back toward the reception like a woman heading to the gallows, or the battlefield. In her purse were the documents. In her blood, fire. The ballroom glowed under chandeliers, laughter echoing across marble floors. The string quartet played something elegant. Guests danced, toasted, smiled. But at the far end, Vanessa stood, dressed in perfection, surrounded by admirers, untouchable. Until Margaret crossed the threshold, Vanessa saw her first. Her eyes narrowed, her posture sharpening, like a knife finding its grip. You're still here, she said smoothly, stepping away from the group. I figured you'd be halfway down a bottle by now. Margaret didn't blink. I have something to say. Jason wasn't there yet. That mattered. Vanessa crossed her arms. This isn't the place. Margaret's voice was low and even. You made it the place the moment you tried to destroy everything I've built. The guests turned, first out of curiosity, then concern. Vanessa smiled. Careful. You don't want to embarrass yourself. No, Margaret said, but I'm done letting you embarrass me. She reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope. The lies, the manipulation, the financial tracking, the staged power of attorney. I know all of. Vanessa's eyes flickered briefly. But enough. Jason will never believe you, she said. He doesn't have to, Margaret said, because this isn't about him choosing sides. It's about the truth standing in the light. Guests began to murmur. Phones tilted discreetly. Margaret didn't care. Vanessa took a step closer. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. Do you know what it feels like to have everything you've worked for vanish? I do. Because of your family, your legacy, your perfect, untouchable life. This, she gestured at the room, wasn't about Jason, it was about watching you crumble. Margaret's chest burned. So you never loved him, she said. Vanessa tilted her head. Love is irrelevant. Influence is permanent. And then Jason appeared behind them, silent, listening. Margaret saw him before Vanessa did. I built myself from nothing, Vanessa continued, not noticing. But I was never going to be enough for people like you, so I found a way to become inevitable. And now you're the footnote. Jason's voice cut in like, is that what I am to you? Vanessa spun. His face was unreadable, still, and heartbreakingly quiet. Jason, she stammered. I didn't mean it like that. He looked at his mother, then back at his wife. You said you loved me. I do, she said too. Margaret stayed silent. Jason took the envelope from his mother's hands and opened it. The room went quiet. He flipped through the pages, one by one, slowly, and with each page, something in him unraveled. I trusted you, he said. Vanessa stepped forward. Jason. He stepped back. You used me. Used my name, my money, my mother's past, just to settle some score. I did it for us, Vanessa said. There is no us, he said. She reached for him, and he pulled away. Then he turned to Margaret, his voice hollow. And you were right. Margaret's throat tightened. Jason handed the envelope back to her. I need time, he said. But thank you for not giving up. Vanessa stood frozen, alone now. Her mask cracked, her empire crumbling in real time. Margaret took a slow breath. She walked past Vanessa, her shoulders high, and when she reached Jason, she touched his arm gently. I'll always be your mother, she whispered, voice trembling. No matter what. Jason didn't reply. He didn't need to, because for the first time in years, he didn't look away. The chandeliers still sparkled, the string quartet still played, but the illusion had fractured, and Margaret stood among the wreckage, not triumphant, but whole for the first time in years. She stepped outside into the night air. The celebration continued behind her, but its music felt distant, muted by the weight of everything that had been said. Jason hadn't followed her. She didn't expect him to. Margaret found a bench beneath an oak tree, near the edge of the estate's garden. It was quiet here, the kind of quiet that echoed. She opened her purse and took out the now-worn envelope, its corners soft from her grip. Everything inside had detonated a truth no one wanted but everyone needed. Vanessa had vanished. After Jason turned away, Margaret didn't know where she went. And for now, she didn't care. Her focus had shifted. From war to recovery. The stars above blinked through the clouds. She stared at them. Exhausted, she had done what no mother ever wanted to do. Hold up a mirror to her own child's illusion, and ask him to see it for what it truly was. And now, he was gone. Jason had walked away from both of them, not toward another woman, not toward safety, but toward himself. Margaret knew it was necessary, but that didn't stop the ache in her chest from pulsing with each breath. She let the silence fill her, and in it, she remembered the nights she'd worked double shifts, the birthdays she'd celebrated alone with him, the dreams she'd folded into school lunches, and late-night advice. All of that was real. Vanessa couldn't erase that. No one could. A rustle to her left. She looked up to see Sarah, Jason's cousin, approach with cautious steps. She didn't speak, just sat beside her and offered a flask. Margaret took it. One sip. Warmth. Silence. I always knew, Sarah finally said. Not all of it, but enough. I'm sorry. Margaret nodded. Me too. More silence. Then, you're not alone, Sarah added. Not anymore. Margaret looked at her, something like gratitude catching in her throat. And just like that, the path forward revealed itself. Not lit, not paved, but real. She rose the next morning in her own home, the estate behind her, a new emptiness, where Jason's wedding should have lived in memory. But she brewed coffee, fed her garden, called a lawyer. She started again. She reached out to her old friends, to Elaine, even to Mark, and each time, she felt a little more of herself return. Control wasn't something she'd lost. It had only been waiting. By the end of the week, the documents were secure, Vanessa's power of attorney revoked, financial accounts frozen, legal protections restored. Margaret sat at her kitchen table that Sunday, sunlight streaking through the windows, a notebook open beside her. Not plans, not revenge, Just next steps. Her phone buzzed. A text. No name. No number. Just one line. I still have the final piece of your past. You'll never be free. Margaret stared at it, her fingers hovering above the screen. Outside, the wind rustled the hydrangeas. She didn't reply. Not yet. Because if someone still held a piece of her past, then it meant her story wasn't done. And this time, she wasn't going to fight from behind. She would go first. Her hands closed the notebook gently. One truth had already shattered the day, but another waited in the shadows, and Margaret was ready to bring it into the light. The scent of lemon balm drifted through the open kitchen window, mingling with the low hum of morning birds. Margaret stood barefoot on the tile floor, coffee in hand, watching the sun inch its way across her overgrown garden. It wasn't victory she felt. It was release. She hadn't opened the message again, the one that threatened her freedom. Whoever sent it expected fear. Instead, it had sparked something else. Resolve. She had survived Vanessa, survived betrayal, silence, doubt, and now, for the first time in decades, Margaret didn't feel like someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's target. She felt like herself. She walked through her house, slowly, touching things she hadn't touched in months. Her father's old bookshelf, the framed photo of Jason, as a baby, the worn arm of the reading chair she always meant to reupholster. None of it had power over her anymore. Not grief, not guilt, just presence. Later that day, a letter arrived by hand. No return address, only Jason's familiar handwriting on the envelope. Not a text, not an email. A letter. She carried it to the porch, and sat with her feet tucked beneath her, reading the words under the soft hush of wind chimes. Mom, it began. I don't know where to start, except with this. I'm sorry, for believing lies, for pushing you away, for needing space when all you gave me was love. I'm still figuring out who I am without Vanessa's voice in my ear, but I know this much. I see you now, not the version she painted. My mother, the one who never stopped fighting for me, even when I didn't want her to. Margaret's fingers brushed her cheek, surprised to find tears there. The letter ended with a quiet promise. I'm not ready yet, but I will be. And when I am, I hope we can sit on that porch again. No ghosts between us. Just two people who made it through something, together. She folded the paper carefully, and set it on the table beside her. It was enough. In the weeks that followed, Margaret reclaimed more than just bank accounts. She reclaimed time, agency, small joys. She volunteered at the local library again, hosted brunch with Sarah and Elaine. She began converting the guest room into an office. No more waiting for someone to visit, who never did. This space would be hers. One afternoon, she wandered into the attic. It smelled of cedar and dust. Old boxes marked Jason College, and Xmas lights lined the shelves. In the far corner she found a trunk she hadn't opened since her mother died. Inside, clippings, letters, faded photographs. One caught her eye, her mother and Vanessa's aunt, younger, in front of the same estate where the wedding had been held. She stared at their expressions, unfazed. So it had gone deeper than she'd thought, but it no longer surprised her. Margaret didn't tear the photo. She filed it away, not out of fear, but to remember, because remembering was power too, and she had plenty of that now. She didn't need to destroy the past anymore, just refused to be bound by it. Evenings became sacred. She'd light candles, pour tea, and write. Not emails, not letters, but thoughts, stories, the truth in her voice, not distorted through anyone else's version of her. By the end of September, the hydrangeas had wilted, and the garden whispered its slow surrender to fall. Margaret stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, sweater wrapped tight. This was the moment between seasons, between who she'd been and who she was becoming. She took a deep breath and stepped down the first stair, gravel crunching beneath her shoes. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't scare her. Not the message, not the silence, not the unknown, because freedom didn't look like safety. It looked like choice, and Margaret had finally made hers.